Amina had always been known in her village for her quiet strength and the deep connection she shared with her mother, Mariama. From a young age, their bond was something remarkable, more than just the usual mother and daughter relationship. Mariama's love for Amina was fierce and protective, wrapped in the everyday acts of care that shaped Amina's world. Whether it was the way Mariama braided her hair with such tender precision or the stories she told beneath the baobab tree at dusk, Amina's childhood was a tapestry woven tightly with her mother's love. In their village, life was simple but held deep meaning. Every tradition, every ritual was infused with stories passed down through generations, and Mariama was the keeper of many such stories. She was not just a mother but a pillar of the community, known for her wisdom and kindness. People often sought her advice, and her presence brought comfort to those around her. For Amina, losing Mariama wasn't just losing a parent, it was like losing the very heart of her world. The day Mariama died was a day the entire village seemed to hold its breath. From early morning, a thick cloud of sorrow hung over the small homes and dusty paths. Neighbors gathered in quiet groups, whispering prayers and sharing memories, while Amina sat near her mother's body, her face pale and still, her eyes wide but empty. The raw grief in the air was tangible, and yet Amina's grief was wrapped in a silence so profound it was almost more piercing than tears. Everyone expected her to weep openly, as was the custom, especially for daughters whose cries at a mother's passing were seen as a sacred rite, a way to honor the soul's journey. But Amina did not cry. Not even a tear traced down her cheek. Instead, she sat with the calm stillness of someone whose world had been shattered but who refused to show it. The villagers whispered among themselves, puzzled by her silence, yet no one dared to question her directly. That silence, however, was not a sign of peace but a storm held tightly inside her heart. She was fighting a battle within, trying to hold together the pieces of a life suddenly broken. Mariama had been her anchor, her guiding star, and now the sky seemed empty without her light. As the sun began to set, an unexpected figure stepped forward, her uncle, a man whose eyes held shadows darker than the fading daylight. He was known for his sternness, a man who ruled parts of the village with an iron fist. The uncle approached Amina with a grave expression, carrying a pair of sharp scissors in his hand. The murmurs around the gathering grew louder. Everyone sensed something was about to change. Without warning, the uncle grabbed Amina's long, beautiful hair, the same hair Mariama had spent countless hours braiding with love, and cut it off in one swift motion. The sharp snap of the scissors echoed through the silence like a breaking chain. Gasps rose from the crowd as the strands fell to the dusty earth, lifeless and discarded. The act was not merely physical. It was a cruel, symbolic gesture meant to sever Amina from her mother's memory and break the spirit that Mariama had nurtured in her. Hair, in their culture, was more than just appearance. It was identity, heritage, and a living connection to the past. To cut it off was to try and erase the bond that tied Amina to her mother and to the legacy that Mariama had built. Amina stood frozen, the weight of the scissors cut reverberating through her body. Though tears threatened to spill, she swallowed them back fiercely. She would not give the uncle the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Instead, a silent vow formed within her. No matter what he did, she would carry her mother's memory inside her, beyond the reach of any blade. That night, as the village settled into a mournful quiet, Amina sat alone by the firelight, fingers brushing the short remnants of her hair. Each strand seemed to pulse with the warmth of her mother's love and the whispers of the stories they had shared. She realized that though the physical connection had been severed, the true bond between her and Mariama was something no one could cut away. It was etched deep within her soul. Amina's silence that day was not weakness. It was the beginning of a strength that would carry her through the darkest times ahead. Though her world had been shattered, she was determined to hold the pieces together, not for anyone else, but for herself and the mother whose memory refused to fade. In the stillness of that night, a quiet fire ignited within Amina's heart, promising that every strand of her hair, and every memory it held, would remember the truth, no matter what storms came. This was the day her world changed forever. Amina's hair had always been more than just strands of silk that cascaded down her back. In her village, hair was sacred, a living symbol of identity, memory, and power that carried the stories of generations. Every braid told a tale, every curl was a testament to resilience and connection to the ancestors. The intricate patterns woven into her mother's braids were like a secret language, passed down through the ages, binding Amina not just to her mother but to a lineage older than memory itself. From childhood, Amina was taught that hair was a vessel of spirit, a keeper of the soul's essence. It was said that when a woman's hair was cut without consent, especially under dark circumstances, it was more than just a physical loss. It was a spiritual wound, an attempt to sever the thread that connected her to her roots and the strength of her ancestors. The elders often spoke in hushed tones about the sacredness of hair, how it carried the prayers, the struggles, and the triumphs of those who came before. To cut hair was to silence those stories, to break the invisible chain that kept the community's history alive. When her uncle severed Amina's hair the day her mother died, it was not just a cruel punishment, it was a curse in the eyes of many. The act was loaded with meaning, a violent erasure of identity, a symbolic imprisonment of her spirit. The villagers who understood this felt a deep, almost physical ache witnessing the fallen strands on the dusty ground. They knew this was no ordinary haircut, it was a deliberate attempt to weaken her, to strip away the power that her hair held, and by extension, the power of her mother's legacy. Amina's internal struggle was immense. She grappled not only with the raw grief of losing her mother but also with the profound loss of her hair, which felt like losing a part of herself. Each time she touched the short strands that now framed her face, she felt a sharp pang, a reminder of the connection that had been violently cut. Her hair was a mirror reflecting her pain and the fragmented pieces of her heritage. The loss weighed heavily on her spirit, threatening to suffocate the strength her mother had nurtured in her. Yet, beneath the sorrow, a fierce resistance brewed within Amina. She refused to let this forced severance define her or erase her identity. Though her hair was gone, the memories and stories it held were etched deep inside her heart, alive and untouchable. She knew that the true power of her hair was not just in its physical form but in the spirit it represented, a spirit that no blade could ever cut. The community's reaction to Amina's haircut was a complex tapestry of sympathy, fear, and judgment. Some villagers mourned silently with her, understanding the heavy symbolism and the pain behind the act. They saw Amina as a victim of cruelty and injustice, their hearts aching for the young girl robbed of both her mother and her heritage in one brutal moment. These villagers quietly offered support, bringing food, words of comfort, and small tokens of hope. Others, however, viewed the haircut through a lens of superstition and fear. In their eyes, the act might have been necessary to protect the village from some dark force or curse they believed could be unleashed through Amina's grief. Whispers circulated about broken traditions and ancient pacts, and some feared that Amina's spirit might be tainted or weakened, threatening the balance of their community. These voices, often led by the elders or those invested in maintaining control, warned against allowing Amina's sorrow to manifest, seeing her silence and short hair as a fragile shield against deeper evils. Judgment came from certain corners as well, particularly from those who supported her uncle's harsh measures. They saw Amina's quietness not as strength but as defiance that needed to be broken. To them, cutting her hair was a lesson in submission, a warning to keep the past buried and the family secrets safe. This faction viewed her grief as dangerous, a seed of rebellion that could unravel the village's carefully maintained order. Caught in this whirlwind of emotions and opinions, Amina felt isolated yet strangely empowered. The cultural weight of her hair and the meaning of its loss became a crucible that tested her spirit. Each reaction she encountered added layers to her understanding of who she was and what she was fighting for. The hair that lay cut on the ground was more than just dead strands, it was a symbol of a battle between silence and voice, suppression and truth. Despite the community's mixed responses, Amina's resolve only deepened. She began to see her hair not just as a victim of violence but as a living archive of resistance. Every strand that fell to the earth carried a fragment of her mother's story, a piece of the village's history, and a spark of power waiting to be reclaimed. In the days that followed, Amina found herself drawn more and more to the memory of her hair, feeling its unseen presence as a source of strength. Her silence too took on new meaning. Where others saw muteness or submission, Amina understood it as a form of protest, a refusal to let grief be weaponized or controlled. Her quiet was not empty, it was full of unspoken truths and fierce loyalty to the legacy that her hair represented. She became a living testament to the idea that even when appearances are stripped away, the essence of identity, memory, and power endures. In this way, the cultural weight of hair transformed from a burden into a beacon for Amina. It was the thread that linked her past with her future, the hidden current beneath her stillness, carrying the promise that the truth, long buried and silenced, would one day be heard again. And as the village continued to watch her with wary eyes, Amina quietly prepared for the day when the strands that remembered would finally speak. Amina sat alone in the dim light of her small room, fingers tracing the uneven edges of the short strands that now crowned her head. Despite the forced cut, despite the loss and pain, something strange had begun to stir, a faint sensation she couldn't explain. It was as if her hair, though severed, held more than just the memory of her mother's touch. It seemed alive, whispering secrets only she could hear, carrying fragments of her mother's voice and memories that drifted into her mind like soft, distant echoes. At first, these whispers were faint, almost imperceptible murmurs that slipped through the silence of the night. They came like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze or the faint crackle of embers in a dying fire. Amina would lie awake, eyes wide open, feeling the presence of something intangible brushing against her soul. Sometimes in the deepest hours before dawn, she could swear she heard her mother's lullaby weaving through the shadows, notes so tender and full of love that they both comforted and haunted her. Each night, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. Amina's dreams, too, transformed into vivid journeys that felt more real than waking life. She would find herself standing in the fields near the village, where wildflowers bloomed under a sky heavy with stars. In these dreams her mother's face appeared, soft and radiant, eyes full of sorrow and wisdom. They never spoke in words, yet Amina understood everything, the warnings, the love, the hidden truths carried silently between them. The dreams became a sacred space where time folded, allowing Amina to glimpse moments she had never lived but deeply felt. She saw her mother weaving stories into their family's hair, stories of strength and survival passed down through generations. She saw laughter shared under the sun, tears shed in secret, and hands that gently combed through curls to soothe fears too heavy for words. These visions made the ache of loss sharper, but they also sparked a growing resolve inside Amina. She was not alone. Driven by these experiences, Amina began seeking ways to understand and communicate with the voices trapped within the strands of her hair. She remembered the stories her mother told her about the power of connection, about how memories and emotions could be woven into the very fibers of hair, acting as vessels that transcended time and space. Determined to unlock this hidden language, Amina turned to the village elders, the storytellers, and the few who still believed in the old ways. Some dismissed her questions as the ramblings of a grief-stricken girl, but others listened with quiet reverence. An old woman named Mama Nia, who had once cared for Amina's mother, took her under her wing. She taught Amina ancient songs and rituals meant to awaken the spirit within hair, explaining that the strands could hold more than just physical form. They could carry the soul's voice, the essence of memory, and the strength of a legacy. Together, they performed simple ceremonies under the moonlight, lighting candles and offering herbs to the ancestors. Amina would hold the handful of her cut hair close, feeling warmth radiate from the fragile strands. As she hummed the melodies Mama Nia taught her, she felt the whispers intensify, like a secret conversation unfolding just beyond the veil of perception. It was as if her mother's spirit was reaching through the hair, trying to guide her, to share a message that could not be spoken aloud. The more Amina listened, the more she realized that the whispers were not random. They were woven with intention, carrying a secret that had been hidden beneath layers of silence and fear. The voices spoke of injustice and betrayal, of pain buried deep within the roots of their family history. They revealed the names of those who had caused harm, the ancient pacts that had silenced the truth, and the strength that Amina alone possessed to break the cycle. This growing sense that her hair carried a secret message filled Amina with a mixture of fear and hope. The secret was powerful, dangerous even, but it was also a key to healing and reclaiming what had been stolen from her and her mother. The strands, though cut from her head, had become a living archive, a bridge between past and present, between sorrow and strength. With each passing night, Amina's bond with the whispers deepened. She found herself speaking softly to the strands, sharing her fears, her dreams, and her determination to protect her mother's memory. The whispers responded, sometimes with gentle sighs, other times with urgent murmurs that stirred the air around her. It was as if the hair was alive, breathing with the collective spirit of those who had come before her, urging her onward. In the village, rumors began to spread about the girl who listened to hair. Some called her blessed, others whispered that she was touched by the spirits. Children would sometimes follow her, curious about the quiet girl who seemed to carry the weight of the past and the promise of the future in her gaze. Amina welcomed the quiet company, knowing that her journey was no longer solitary. As the days turned into weeks, Amina understood that her path was clear. The secret message carried by her hair was a call to action, a summons to uncover hidden truths, to confront the forces that had tried to silence her family, and to reclaim the power embedded in her very being. The whispers were not just memories, they were a living legacy, a testament to resilience and a beacon of hope. Through the strange sensations, the nighttime whispers, and the vivid dreams, Amina began to transform. The girl who had once felt broken and powerless now carried the weight of her mother's spirit with pride. The strands of hair, though no longer attached, continued to speak to her in ways no one else could understand. They reminded her that identity and memory could never truly be cut away, that the truth, once remembered, had the power to change everything. And so, with the voices of the past guiding her, Amina prepared to step forward into the unknown, ready to face the shadows that lurked in the heart of her village. The whispers from the strands had awakened something fierce and unyielding within her, a fire that no one could extinguish and a story that demanded to be told. Amina's journey into the whispers hidden within her cut hair soon led her beyond the boundaries of what she thought she knew about her family, her village, and the unseen ties that bound them all. It was during one of her visits to her grandmother, Mama Kaysai, an elder revered for her knowledge of the ancient ways, that Amina's understanding deepened in ways she had never imagined. Mama Kaysai's small hut was a place of shadows and light, filled with shelves of herbs, old books, and woven baskets. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage and earth, as if the very walls held memories waiting to be unearthed. When Amina arrived, her grandmother greeted her with a knowing smile, as if she had been expecting this visit for some time. Without preamble, Mama Kaysai spoke of the family's ancient ritual, one kept secret for generations, known only to the women who guarded the legacy of their ancestors. Hair, she said softly, is not merely strands of keratin. It is a living vessel, a thread that weaves the present to the past, the seen to the unseen. Amina listened intently as her grandmother explained that hair had long been used in their lineage as a way to hold and transfer ancestral knowledge. When a mother cut her daughter's hair or passed down a lock, it was an act of binding, of memory, of spiritual inheritance. Each strand was believed to carry the essence of those who came before, encoding stories, wisdom, and power within its fibers. This knowledge struck Amina with profound clarity. The whispers she had been hearing were not just echoes of grief or imagination. They were messages encoded in her hair, memories waiting to be unlocked. She realized that the sudden and brutal cutting of her hair by her uncle was more than an act of cruelty or control. It was an attempt to sever her connection to this ancient lineage, to silence the voice of the past that lived within her. As Mama Kaysai revealed the details of the ritual, she took from a worn wooden box a small bundle of dried hair tied with a faded red ribbon. "This," she said, "is from your great-grandmother. It holds the story of our family's strength and survival through countless hardships." She placed the bundle gently in Amina's hands, and the weight of it felt heavier than its size suggested, as if it carried the burden of generations. The ritual, Mama Kaysai explained, was meant to be performed in times of crisis or transition. By carefully weaving strands of hair with spoken prayers and sacred songs, the living could open a channel to the ancestors, gaining guidance, protection, and hidden truths. It was a gift, and a responsibility, that came with great power but also great risk. Amina's mind raced with questions. How could she perform such a ritual? Was it too late now, after her hair had been cut against her will? Could the strands she held still connect her to the strength of her ancestors, or had her uncle's act truly severed the lineage? Sensing Amina's turmoil, Mama Kaysai placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "The power does not reside in the hair alone, child. It flows from the blood, the spirit, and the memory that you carry within you. Your hair is a key, yes, but you hold the door." As Amina absorbed these words, a shadow crossed the doorway of the hut. Her uncle Omari had come unexpectedly. His eyes flickered with fear and anger as he saw the bundle in Amina's hands. His voice was low and threatening as he warned her to stop chasing shadows. "This is not for you," he spat. "Some truths are dangerous, better left buried." But Amina stood firm, feeling the growing fire of defiance within her. She saw in Omari's face the reflection of the same fear that had driven him to cut her hair, a desperate attempt to suppress what he could not control. His fear was rooted not only in superstition but in the secrets he and the village council wished to keep hidden. Despite his threats, Amina felt an undeniable pull to embrace the ritual her grandmother spoke of. She knew that uncovering the hidden truths encoded in her hair could expose the lies and betrayals that had shaped her family's fate. And in doing so, she might reclaim the power stolen from her and others before her. That night, guided by Mama Kaysai's instructions, Amina prepared for the ritual. She gathered the strands of her own cut hair and the bundle from her great-grandmother, weaving them carefully with thread and whispering prayers in the old tongue. The air grew thick with energy, charged with the presence of ancestors long past but not forgotten. As the ritual unfolded, Amina felt the veil between worlds thin. The whispers grew louder, clearer, carrying voices and visions that revealed long-hidden secrets stories of courage, betrayal, love, and sacrifice. She saw images of her ancestors standing tall against oppression, their hair flowing like rivers of memory, their spirits unbroken. Through the ritual, Amina realized that her hair was a bridge, a vessel of ancestral power and truth that connected her not only to her past but to the future she was destined to shape. It was this sacred link that her uncle and others had feared, for it threatened to unravel the carefully maintained silence and control. Omari's attempts to suppress this knowledge only underscored its significance. The ritual showed Amina that the power to heal and to fight lay within her grasp, as long as she refused to let fear dictate her path. The strands of hair, once cut to diminish her, had instead become her greatest strength. Empowered by this revelation, Amina understood that her journey was no longer just about mourning her mother or reclaiming her identity. It was about awakening a legacy that could challenge the shadows lurking in her village. The forbidden family ritual was not a relic of the past but a living force, waiting to be wielded by the rightful heir. With the ritual complete, Amina felt a deep connection to the voices in her hair and a renewed determination to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Her uncle's fear, the village's silence, and the pain of loss could no longer bind her. She was the keeper of memory, the bearer of truth, and the spark of a new dawn. Amina's connection to her hair deepened far beyond what she had ever imagined. What began as faint whispers and subtle sensations soon blossomed into vivid visions and encounters that blurred the boundaries between the natural and supernatural worlds. The strands of hair she once thought were only a symbol of loss had become a powerful spiritual link, a guardian that protected her and the legacy of her family, even as forces both seen and unseen sought to silence her. It began with dreams so vivid that Amina woke feeling as though she had crossed through another realm. In these nocturnal journeys, her mother appeared to her not as a fading memory but as a living presence, speaking in hushed tones and guiding her through shadowy landscapes. Her mother's face was serene but solemn, and her voice carried the weight of secrets long buried beneath layers of silence. One night, Amina found herself walking along a riverbank bathed in moonlight. Her mother's spirit stood on the water's edge, surrounded by tendrils of mist that shimmered with an ethereal glow. The river whispered secrets in a language only the heart could understand, and the strands of Amina's hair seemed to ripple in response, catching the light like threads of starlight woven into her very being. "Remember," her mother said softly, "the hair holds the stories of our bloodline, stories that the living must hear and honor. But beware, for those who seek to silence these truths will come with shadows." With that warning, Amina's dreams shifted, revealing pieces of her mother's past she had never known, the battles she fought to protect their family, the hidden enemies she faced, and the sacrifices she made to keep their legacy alive. These visions were painful but empowering, filling Amina with a fierce resolve to carry on what her mother had begun. During waking hours, the presence of the hare's spirit guardian became unmistakable. At times, Amina would feel a protective warmth envelop her, a comforting embrace that seemed to ward off unseen dangers. The strands of hair, though cut, pulsed with a life of their own, as if each filament was a tiny sentinel standing watch over her soul. But this newfound strength did not go unnoticed. Whispers spread through the village about the changes in Amina. People said her eyes gleamed with a strange light, that the air around her felt charged with energy, and that she seemed untouched by the fear and sorrow that gripped others. Some revered her quietly, sensing the awakening of a power older than the village itself. Others, especially those loyal to the council and her fearful uncle, watched her with suspicion and dread. The forces that wished to keep the village under control began to stir. Shadows lengthened in dark corners, and an unspoken tension grew heavier with each passing day. Amina soon realized that the same powers that had tried to sever her connection through the cutting of her hair were now escalating their efforts to break her spirit altogether. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Amina was walking through the dense forest that bordered the village. The wind whispered urgently, carrying voices she recognized, the voices of ancestors, urging her onward. Suddenly, the trees seemed to close in around her, their twisted branches like grasping hands. The air thickened with an oppressive presence, chilling her to the bone. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, an apparition of malevolent energy that sought to snatch away the light that flickered within her. Amina stood frozen for a moment, but the warmth in her hair flared like a beacon. The spirit guardian responded, weaving a protective shield around her, pushing back the darkness with a force that startled even Amina. "You cannot silence what has been spoken through blood and bone," a voice echoed in the night, ancient and unyielding. That night marked a turning point. Amina understood that her hair was more than a connection to memory, it was a battleground for the soul of her family, a living archive of truth and power that must be defended against those who thrived in silence and fear. As days turned to weeks, the village could not help but notice the transformation in Amina. She moved with a newfound grace and confidence, her presence commanding respect and awe. Children whispered her name with reverence, and elders nodded knowingly when she passed. Even the skeptical villagers began to sense that she carried the strength of generations within her. Yet with each passing day the threats against her intensified. Unexplained accidents, ominous signs, and shadowy figures lurking at the edges of her vision became frequent reminders of the dangerous path she walked. Her uncle's warnings evolved into desperate attempts to control or break her spirit through intimidation and isolation. But Amina refused to be cowed. She drew strength from the whispers in her hair, from the visions of her mother's courage, and from the unshakable belief that she was the living thread connecting past and future. The guardian spirit within her hair became her shield and her sword, a source of power that no force could easily extinguish. In quiet moments, Amina would touch the strands that remained, feeling the heartbeat of her ancestors and the promise of truth yet to be revealed. Her hair was no longer just a symbol of loss or oppression. It was the living spirit of her family, alive and fighting alongside her. The unseen spirit in the hair was more than memory, it was a call to action, a guardian's warning and a beacon of hope. It promised that no matter the darkness that sought to swallow her, Amina would stand strong, not only for herself but for all those whose voices had been silenced. Her transformation was not just personal, it was the stirring of a revolution, a reclaiming of power that would ripple through the village and beyond. The strands of hair that had once been cut in an attempt to break her now sang with the power of 1,000 stories, waiting to be told. Amina's journey toward uncovering the truth behind her mother's death had only just begun, yet it was already a path shadowed with betrayal and danger. The whispers carried by her hair guided her deeper into the secrets her family had long buried, secrets that some in the village had gone to great lengths to hide, and others to exploit for their own gain. Her mother had always been a figure of quiet strength, a woman respected by many but envied by a few. As Amina pieced together fragments from the dreams, the ancestral voices, and the stories half-spoken by village elders, a complex web of jealousy and deceit emerged, centered tightly around her uncle, the man who had severed her hair in a brutal act of control and suppression. Amina's first real confrontation came when she quietly questioned the women in her family's inner circle. They spoke cautiously, wary of the shadows watching and listening. Through their guarded words, Amina learned of a simmering rivalry that had long existed between her mother and her uncle, a rivalry fueled by differing visions for the family's future and the village's welfare. Her uncle, once her mother's closest ally, had grown cold and calculating over the years. His desire for control had transformed into obsession, and his fear of losing influence made him willing to go to extreme lengths. The cut of Amina's hair was not just an act of cruelty but a symbolic gesture, intended to break the legacy her mother had nurtured, a legacy of truth, resilience, and spiritual power. But as Amina delved deeper, it became clear that her uncle was not acting alone. Shadows within the village council had conspired in silence, afraid that the revelations her mother carried would upset the delicate balance of power. These were men and women who had prospered in the comfort of secrets and silence, feeding off the suffering of others to maintain their own status. One night, fueled by a mixture of grief and determination, Amina confronted her uncle directly in the dim light of their ancestral home. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Her uncle's face was hard, eyes cold with calculation. He denied nothing. Instead, he tried to twist the narrative, painting her mother as reckless and dangerous, a threat to the village's peace. "You do not understand," he warned, voice low and sharp. "She endangered us all. The truths she held could have brought ruin. I did what was necessary to protect you, to protect us." But Amina's heart burned with a different fire, the fire of someone who refused to be controlled by lies and fear. She spoke of the voices she heard in her hair, of the visions that showed her the truth behind her mother's death, a death that was no accident, but a carefully orchestrated betrayal to silence a woman who dared to stand for justice. The confrontation shattered the fragile facade her uncle had maintained. In a moment of fury and desperation, he revealed fragments of the truth, a poisoned cup given in secret, whispered threats in the night, and a plot hatched by those who saw her mother's power as a threat to their rule. Amina's resolve solidified. She would no longer be a silent witness to her family's suffering. The strands of hair that once symbolized loss now carried the weight of justice and vengeance. They hummed with ancestral power, urging her to rise and expose the lies that had shackled her family for generations. With each step toward truth, Amina faced increasing danger. The village council grew restless and the threats against her became more overt, strangers watching her movements, shadows lurking where none should be. Yet, the power within her hair shielded her, weaving a protective barrier that grew stronger with every secret she uncovered. In quiet moments, Amina would touch the remaining strands and hear her mother's voice, a steady reminder that the fight was not hers alone. It was the fight of every woman who had been silenced, every story buried beneath the weight of fear. Her hair was the living testament to those struggles, and through it, the truth would finally break free. The day was coming when the veil of deception would be torn away, and the village would have to face the dark secrets it had hidden for too long. Amina was ready to be the voice of that reckoning, to turn pain into power, and to honor her mother's memory by lighting the path for those who would follow. The strands of her hair remembered every whispered secret, every betrayal, and every promise made in silence, and now they were ready to shout the truth to the world. Amina watched in awe as her hair began to grow back, not just as strands of ordinary hair, but as something alive with an otherworldly glow. Each strand shimmered faintly, pulsating with a warm light that seemed to carry the breath of generations past. It was as if the ancestral energy that had once been threatened by the brutal cut now surged stronger, refusing to be silenced or diminished. This hair was no longer simply a part of her body, it had become a living bridge between the present and the past, a vessel for memories, power, and truth. Amina felt it whispering softly, guiding her to places she had never dared to go, into the depths of her family's history, into the forgotten tales that had shaped her lineage, and into the raw emotions of her mother's final moments. With focused intent, Amina began to channel the power embedded within her hair. She sat quietly in the sacred spaces her mother once frequented, closing her eyes and reaching inward, allowing the glowing strands to unlock memories not only hers but also those carried by her ancestors. These memories came to her in vivid flashes, moments of joy, pain, betrayal, and resilience that had been hidden beneath layers of silence. One particularly powerful vision showed her mother standing tall amid a sea of whispers, her voice rising above the crowd as she spoke truth to power. In that moment, Amina understood the full weight of her mother's sacrifice. It wasn't just her life that had been taken, but an attempt to erase an entire legacy of courage and defiance. But that legacy had endured, embedded in every glowing strand of Amina's hair. As Amina shared these visions and stories with her family, a healing began to take root. Old wounds, long festering in silence, started to mend. Relatives who had once been estranged found themselves drawn together by the shared truth that was no longer buried. The ancestral energy in her hair seemed to cleanse the air, breaking down walls built on mistrust and fear. The village, too, felt the ripple of this transformation. Where once the cut hair was seen as a curse or a sign of disgrace, it was now revered as a symbol of remembrance and power. Elders who had once preached silence on grief and loss now acknowledged the vital role memory played in healing. Mothers began teaching daughters the ancient songs and stories that honored their ancestors, and hair became a sacred vessel of identity and strength rather than a tool of shame. Amina became a beacon for this change, traveling to neighboring villages to share the story of her family's journey. She spoke of the power of remembering, of honoring pain as well as joy, and of the strength found in embracing one's heritage. Her glowing hair was a living testament to this truth, drawing awe and respect wherever she went. Yet, Amina also knew the power she wielded was fragile, requiring care and reverence. She tended to her hair with rituals passed down through generations, washing it with water from the sacred river, weaving it with threads of the earth, and anointing it with oils infused with herbs that carried ancestral blessings. These acts were not just for beauty but were a form of communion with the spirits who guided her. Through this connection, Amina began to unlock deeper abilities. Her hair seemed to respond to her emotions, glowing brighter when she felt hope and dimming in moments of sorrow, almost as if it mirrored the state of her soul. This bond gave her strength in times of doubt and a sense of purpose that was unshakable. The transformation did not come without challenges. Some villagers still clung to old fears, whispering warnings about the dangers of awakening ancestral power. But Amina met these with patience and understanding, inviting them to witness the healing and growth she was fostering. Slowly, many hearts softened, and the village began to see that embracing their history, both the light and the dark, was the key to their collective future. One day, as Amina stood before the village council, her glowing hair cascading like a living flame, she spoke with quiet conviction. Our hair remembers. It carries the stories of those who came before us, their struggles, their victories, their love. To cut it is not just to sever strands of flesh, but to silence voices that deserve to be heard. We must honor this gift and protect it, for in remembering we find strength. Her words sparked a new tradition, one that celebrated hair as a sacred link to memory and identity. Ceremonies were held where daughters would braid their hair with stories whispered by their grandmothers, and young men learned to respect these symbols of heritage. The village began to heal, not just from the scars of the past but from the wounds of silence that had long held them captive. Amina's own journey of remembrance continued to deepen, and with each step her hair's glow grew brighter, illuminating the path forward for her family and her people. It was a light born not just of ancestral power, but of love, truth, and the unbreakable bond between past and present. Through the power of remembering, Amina transformed her pain into a legacy of hope, one that would shine for generations to come. Amina stood before the gathered villagers, her hair flowing like a river of light behind her, the radiant strands glowing softly in the early morning sun. The air was thick with anticipation, a heavy silence settling over the crowd. Today was no ordinary day, it was the moment she had been building toward, one that would break decades of silence, fear, and oppression. For years, the village had lived under the weight of unspoken truths and painful secrets, enforced by elders who guarded their power through fear. Amina's uncle had been one of the strongest enforcers of this silence. His ruthless act of cutting her hair the day her mother died was meant to be the ultimate symbol of control, an attempt to sever her connection to her past, to her power, and to the memories her mother had entrusted to her. But Amina refused to be broken. As she stepped forward, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension swirling in the air. Some remembered the whispers of the glowing hair, the strange lights that had flickered in the night, and the stories of Amina's visions. Others clung to the old fears, wary of the changes her presence represented. Yet all eyes were on her now, waiting for the truth she carried. With steady breath, Amina raised her voice, clear and unwavering. For too long our village has been bound by silence. Silence enforced by fear, by lies, and by those who would control us through pain. My mother's death was not an accident, and the truth has been hidden to protect the corrupt. I stand before you now, not as a victim but as a bearer of our history, of the memories and voices that have been buried beneath shame. Her words rippled through the crowd, breaking the stillness like a stone cast into a still pond. Faces shifted, some pale with guilt, others hard with defiance. Her uncle, standing among the elders, scowled but said nothing. The power balance was shifting, and for the first time many could feel it. Amina's hair shimmered with an almost ethereal glow, the strands catching the light as if alive with the breath of the ancestors. This hair, she continued, holds the stories of our mothers, our grandmothers, and those who came before. It is not a curse but a legacy, a living memory of who we are and where we come from. When my hair was cut, it was meant to silence me, to erase our history. But instead, it has become a symbol of resistance. The village elders exchanged uneasy glances. Some tried to interrupt, warning her of curses and consequences, but Amina raised a hand for silence. No more curses will bind us, she said firmly. The truth is our shield and remembering is our strength. We cannot live in fear of the past, we must embrace it, learn from it, and use it to build a future of hope and justice. As she spoke, a palpable shift began to take place. The elders' grim faces softened, and villagers who had been hesitant began to nod in agreement. Children watched wide-eyed, sensing the power of this moment. Mothers reached for their daughters' hands, whispering words of encouragement. The air seemed to hum with a new energy, a rising tide of courage and healing. Amina called upon the village to join her in a new tradition, a celebration of memory and identity where hair would no longer be a tool of oppression but a symbol of pride and connection. She shared the rituals her grandmother had taught her, weaving stories into braids, anointing hair with sacred oils, and singing songs that honored the ancestors. These acts, she explained, would keep their history alive and protect their community from the darkness of forgetfulness. The response was overwhelming. The village elders, many moved by Amina's bravery and the undeniable power emanating from her hair, pledged to lift the old curses that had haunted their people for generations. They recognized that silence had been their prison and that truth was the key to freedom. Old women who had long hidden their grief behind stoic faces, wept openly for the first time in decades, releasing sorrow that had been trapped too long. The young rejoiced, inspired by a new legacy of strength and remembrance. And for Amina, this moment was both a victory and a new beginning, a call to nurture this fragile hope and guide her people toward healing. In the weeks that followed, the village transformed. The old fears and superstitions gave way to a renewed sense of community. Hair salons became places of storytelling and connection rather than judgment. Songs of the ancestors echoed through the hills, and the legacy of memory grew stronger with every passing day. Amina's hair continued to glow, a beacon of the power that truth and remembrance could hold. She traveled between villages, sharing her story and encouraging others to break their own silences. Her journey became a movement, inspiring many to reclaim their histories and embrace the power within themselves. Through breaking the silence, Amina had not only freed her village from the chains of the past but had ignited a flame of hope that would burn bright for generations to come. The power of remembering had triumphed over fear, proving that even in the darkest times, truth has the strength to heal and transform. Amina stood in the center of the village square, surrounded by faces young and old, their eyes reflecting a mixture of reverence and hope. The sun cast a golden glow over the gathering, illuminating her hair, long, thick and radiant, like a living testament to her journey and the legacy she now carried. This moment marked not just a celebration, but a transformation for the entire community. Amina had accepted a role far greater than she had ever imagined, the guardian of her family's history and the village's soul. Her path to this role had been carved through pain, betrayal, and discovery. The painful day her mother died, when her uncle cut her hair to sever her spirit, had seemed like an end. Yet it was the beginning of a deeper awakening. Through the whispers from her hair, the visions of the past, and the courage to confront the elders, Amina had uncovered truths long buried and silenced. Now those truths had blossomed into something powerful and alive. Her hair had become more than just strands of keratin. It was a symbol of strength, resilience, and memory. Every curl, every braid, every glow was infused with the voices of her ancestors, the struggles and triumphs of generations past. It held stories of love and loss, of wisdom passed down through women who had borne the weight of history silently but fiercely. Amina knew that by nurturing her hair, she was nurturing the collective memory of her people. Gathered around her were villagers who once whispered in fear, now listening in awe. Children reached out tentatively to touch the glowing strands, sensing the sacred power they contained. Mothers smiled, inspired to pass down new stories, and elders nodded with newfound respect for the traditions Amina was reviving. The shift from silence to openness was palpable, a healing that reached into the very roots of the village's identity. Amina began to share the rituals her grandmother had taught her, rituals that honored the ancestors not with fear, but with love and remembrance. She taught how hair could be braided with herbs and charms to protect the wearer, how songs and stories could be woven into the braids to carry memory forward, and how the act of caring for hair was a sacred connection to those who came before. These rituals were not mere superstition but acts of defiance against the erasure of history. Together with the village women, Amina organized gatherings under the baobab tree, where they would braid each other's hair, tell stories of the past, and sing songs that echoed through the night. These gatherings became a sanctuary of healing, a place where wounds could be shared and strength renewed. The community began to see hair not as a tool of control but as a living archive, a map of their collective journey. Amina also worked closely with the village elders, some of whom had resisted change but now recognized the power of remembrance. They helped her record the stories and histories that had been lost to silence, creating a written and oral tradition that blended the old with the new. The elders' wisdom combined with Amina's youthful courage forged a bridge between generations, healing old rifts and fostering unity. Her uncle, once a symbol of oppression and fear, slowly transformed as well. Witnessing Amina's unwavering strength and the community's embrace of this new legacy, he began to atone for his past actions. Though the wounds remained, a tentative reconciliation began, a recognition that the past could not be changed but the future could be shaped with truth and compassion. The village itself began to change in subtle but profound ways. Public ceremonies at funerals and births now included the ritual braiding of hair, honoring the continuum of life and memory. Hair salons became communal spaces where stories were shared, and children learned about their heritage through the care of their hair. Festivals celebrated the strength of women and the power of remembrance, with music and dance that stirred the soul. Amina's role extended beyond her village as word of her story spread to neighboring communities. She traveled far and wide, sharing the teachings of hair as a sacred vessel of memory and identity. Her journey inspired others to reclaim their histories and break free from the silence imposed by fear or tradition. The movement she sparked was a ripple that promised to grow into a wave of cultural renaissance. At night, when the village was quiet, Amina would sit by the fire, running her fingers through her glowing hair, feeling the presence of her mother and ancestors close. She understood the weight of her responsibility but also the profound gift it was to carry this legacy forward. Her hair was not just a symbol, it was a living connection to the past and a beacon lighting the way for future generations. The transformation from silence and fear to openness and healing was a testament to the power of memory and the strength found in embracing one's history. Through her courage and the sacred strands of her hair, Amina had not only reclaimed her identity but had rekindled the spirit of her people. The village was no longer bound by shadows of the past but was stepping into the light of truth, unity, and hope. As the dawn broke over the hills, bathing the village in warm light, Amina felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but the legacy she now guarded was strong and alive. She was the new guardian of memory, a living testament to the power of remembering, and through her the village would never forget again. Amina stood on the crest of the hill overlooking her village, the evening breeze catching her hair and letting it dance freely like a river of black silk under the sunset's amber glow. Each strand shimmered with a life of its own, glowing faintly as if holding secret fires of memory, of truth, and of love passed down through generations. In this moment she was not just a young woman, she was the living embodiment of the legacy she had fought so fiercely to reclaim. Her hair was no longer just hair, it was the strands that remembered everything. The village behind her had transformed deeply. Once a place where whispers of fear and judgment hung heavy in the air, it was now alive with a new respect for the power of memory and identity. The stories of their ancestors, long silenced by fear, curses, and superstition, were being spoken aloud, celebrated, and woven into the fabric of daily life. It was a rebirth, not only for Amina but for everyone who called the village home. The women moved with pride, braiding their hair with the ancient rituals that Amina had revived. Children learned to listen to the whispers hidden in the curls and coils, understanding that hair was a sacred vessel carrying the voices of those who had come before. This was no longer a fearful symbol but a beacon of strength and connection. The elders sat side by side with the youth, sharing histories and memories that had been locked away for too long. Amina's heart swelled with a quiet but powerful joy. She knew the path ahead would have challenges but she was ready. She carried with her the story of her mother, the woman whose love had been so deep that even in death, it echoed through the strands of Amina's hair. This story was her inheritance, her sacred charge, and she vowed to protect it with everything she had. She would be the storyteller, the keeper of the past, and the guardian of truths that might otherwise be lost to time. Her voice, once silenced by grief and oppression, now rang clear and strong within her soul. With every braid she wove, every strand she cared for, she would honor her mother's memory and the legacy of all the women who came before her. As night fell, Amina lit a small fire by the riverbank, the flames flickering and casting dancing shadows on her face. She touched a single strand of her hair, feeling the warmth and the pulse of history running through it. She whispered a prayer, not just for herself, but for the countless souls whose stories were intertwined with hers. She prayed for courage, for healing, and for the strength to carry the legacy forward. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying soft murmurs that seemed to echo from the past. It was as if the very earth itself was alive with memory, reminding her that every strand of hair was a thread in the vast tapestry of human experience, stories of love, loss, defiance, and hope waiting to be told. Amina smiled softly, knowing that her journey was just beginning. The strands that remembered were not just a symbol of what had been lost but a promise of what could be reclaimed and renewed. Through her, the past and future were bound together in a living story, one that would inspire generations to come. With the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, she stood and looked once more toward the village, her home, her heart, her legacy. The strands of her hair flowed freely in the night, carrying the truth of 1,000 voices, 1,000 memories, and the unbreakable power of love that even death could not sever. In this quiet moment, Amina understood the profound truth that had been hidden all along. Every strand of hair holds a story waiting to be told, and she was the one who would tell it.